A very good evening to all of you present here. I, Manoj Singh Rana, from the discipline of Humanities and Social Sciences, welcome you all. Those we love don't go away. They walk beside us every day, unseen, unheard, but always near, still loved, still missed, and very dear. We remember such a figure whom we lost earlier this year, a wonderful human being and an academician, Professor Malavika Subramanyam. In her loving memory, we are beginning the Malavika Memorial Lecture Series today. On this occasion, we are privileged to have with us parents of Professor Malavika Subramanyam. We have with us her mother, Mrs. Srilatha Subramanyam. A huge round of applause. And her father, Dr. A.V. Subramanyam. I now invite Professor Jason Manjali to come onto the dais and welcome the guests on the occasion. Dr. Jason Manjali.
Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here today. Malavika was a dear friend and a colleague. It's very emotional for all of us to be here and in her memory. She was a colleague. She was very involved with IIT Gandhinagar in many ways. She was loved by everyone. She was loved by the students. And I think all of us had a very loving interaction with her all the time. And I kind of feel that it was very unfair that she's not with us today. So we are here to pay our respect to her. And I think she, beyond as an individual, she was a researcher who have contributed immensely to the field. And it is important for us to remember that and to kind of institutionalize her memory into the psyche of IIT Gandhinagar. And I think this is an appropriate occasion, and we have been able to get this memorial lecture started today. Deepak has been and her students have been extremely proactive to get this going. I would like to thank Deepak and her students on behalf of IIT Gandhinagar for the initiative that they've taken. And I also would like to welcome everyone for being here. And the Malavika's parents are here, and I'm so happy to see them here. You always welcome to IIT Gandhinagar. This is your home. So thank you so much, and welcome everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Manjali. May I now kindly request both the parents of Professor Subramanyam to come onto the stage and formally inaugurate the Malavika Memorial Lecture Series by the ceremonious lighting of the diya. A huge round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Accompanying the parents are two bright kids of Malavika Subramanyam, who are closely attached to her, Anupam Sharma and Harvansh Tandelia. Thank you so much. On the occasion of the inauguration of the Malavika Memorial Lecture Series, we are releasing a book commemorating the life of Professor Subramanyam. The book includes testimonials on and academic contributions of Professor Subramanyam. Please note that the copy of the book will also be available in the library of the IITGN. May I kindly request the parents of Professor Malavika Subramanyam to unveil the book. The book contains testimonials on and academic contributions of Professor Malavika Subramanyam. May I now request the parents, a mother, Mrs. Srilatha Subramanyam, and a father, Dr. A.V. Subramanyam, to share their thoughts on Professor Malavika Subramanyam as their daughter.
Namaste. Good afternoon to all of you. At the outset, I would like to thank the organizers of this Memorial Lecture Series to commemorate the memory of Dr. Malavika Subramanyam for having invited us, for having arranged such a fitting program to commemorate her memory. I think among the various things that could have been done, you have chosen one which Malavika would have liked very much, because academics, research, seminar, these are the things which she loved a lot. And the fact that you have taken so much pains to arrange this shows that Malavika did contribute quite a bit to the academic growth of the institute, about which we are all very happy. And about the manner in which you have chosen to commemorate her memory, not only we two, but all the family members who came to know about it, all her friends, our relatives, her cousins, everyone is very, very happy. They're all proud that whatever, because, as family members, we know her not academically, not her research, what she has done, but to know from others the way she has contributed in these fields has really made everyone very proud, and they are very, very happy about this thing being arranged. To share a few memories, because we were together for 48 years. It was our pleasure, and we treasure every moment of time we spent with her. She was a very, very bright child, and it was a joy to be with her anytime. And not only she was intelligent, that we find many people who are intelligent, many children who are intelligent. What was unique about her, I would say, was that she would bring joy with whomever she came across. And everyone would look forward to her visits, because, after you do your +2, you go out for studies, you go do for jobs, and you go abroad and things like that. So you meet once in a way, and everyone would be looking forward to arrival of Malavika to spend time with her. And she would be very good with the elderly. She would talk to them very lovingly. She would take care of their needs. She would play with the children. She would take them to movies and then order food which they wanted. And with her cousins and others, She would have very enjoyable. Everyone enjoyed her company very much. And question comes, why do we have a memorial? Why do we want to remember something about a person in general? Because normally a lot of positive points are associated with that person. I would say that apart from her research and about research activities, her colleagues and others with whom she worked, they would tell, I'm not a competent person to talk on that, but we have heard from so many people during her lifetime and after she passed away, immediately after she passed away, the way she helped them. Maybe her classmates, maybe her colleagues, maybe at MBBS level, at PhD level, every time. They remember very fondly the kind of helping person she was. And she was very dear to her students, that I have seen here also the proof of that. She was very humane in her approach and very compassionate, very considerate to everyone. I think basically she was not selfish. That's the reason why she could be the person she was. Because she could see the needs of others, in what way they could help them. And then she would do that very wholeheartedly and she would enjoy doing that. And that's what made her very unique. Even as a child, I remember she was very bright. She used to be coming first for the class.
Almost a topper.
Topper. So once she asked her mother, Amma, every time I'm coming first, the person who is coming second, he is being scolded by his parents. So can I come second? Should I always come first?
Shall I go without studying and get less marks so that he gets first rank? I
She-
get less marks.
No, as a child, she was considerate to
At
others.
the age
Even
of
at
7 years, she was so considerate to her friends. She had so much of empathy.
and when she was a child, about 4.5 years, she had burn injuries and she was admitted to Manipal Hospital in Manipal, not the one in Bangalore. That is the first Manipal Hospital,
Manipal in Mangalore.
coastal Karnataka. And that's a kind of isolated ward. In the evening, she would be watching a lot of people with white coats and patients. So she would ask her mother, who was staying with her, who are all these people? She said, there are doctors, they're looking after the patients, and they're trying to cure them of their diseases. She said, then I'll become a doctor.
And stay in this hostel.
And I will cure all the people. That was her childhood dream, that she wanted to become a doctor and cure all the people of whatever physical pain they were undergoing. It so happened that she chose medical. Later on, she had an opportunity to do
Stay in the same
medical,
hostel.
and she did go to Manipal and
He did MD there.
MD there, and then and of course, while doing medicine itself, she had told her mother, I will not be a money-making doctor. Please don't be disappointed. I'm more interested in serving people. And then she chose community medicine as her field at the time, as a specialization, and then she did that. And she was, I think, as at least many of you may be knowing, that it does not involve treating individual parents, but more care to the community and to prevent diseases. It's also used to be called as preventive and social medicine as a subject. And from the field of community medicine, she moved on to public health. And she has, I think, done a lot of work on child nutrition, maternal health care and those things. As I said, I'm not very well aware of the kind of work she has done. Right? And she was not only a very bright and academic person, she was also a good dancer, singer, and she used to take part in all activities. And in Karnataka, they used to conduct one Lekha competition to recognize students who are who have an all-round personality. And she was among the few finalists,
She was one among 5 toppers.
top 5 from the whole
in
of
the whole of state,
Karnataka
Karnataka state.
state. And then during her MBBS days, during her second year itself, she was recognized as a very good, not only a performer, but also as an organizer. So she was chosen as the cultural secretary of the college. And depending on seeing the kind of work she did, she continued to be the cultural secretary for the period she was staying there. And she also used to assist other colleges and other organizations to come out with dance shows, and she used to choreograph. And
She was known as Saroj Khan of Davangere.
that's where she did her MBBS. And she used to enjoy life. Not only she used to spend a lot of time on academics. In fact, even when she used to come to our place or during vacation or on holidays, she used to be always with her computer. And then I used to say, come on, take some break and have some time and all that. Of course, she used to have fun, but she was so much attached to her work. She used to spend, even during holidays, a lot of time on either being in touch with her colleagues or superiors, or preparing for what you might call as proposals for projects, etc. And she used to enjoy life, at the same time spend a lot of time on her work. And as I said, more than anything else, I respect her for the very kind person she was from everyone, from the lowest person in the social circle to everyone in the circle. She used to be of utmost help. That's what I would consider as her greatest asset. And she, wherever she was, she would bring life to the whole environment, and that made her unique. And we would always carry those joyous moments and the way she contributed to everyone's, well-being, happiness, or whatever. And that's the way it's going to be. I'm not going to mourn about her, but I'm going to celebrate the kind of work which she gets. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, ma'am, for sharing those intimate moments. All of us have gathered here to celebrate Professor Malavika Subramanyam, who lives amongst us in our conversations and memories. Professor Subramanyam had a background in community medicine, community health education, and social epidemiology through her formal training as an MD from Manipal University, an MPH from the University of Northern Colorado, and a DSc from Harvard University, respectively. Professor Subramanyam had over 20 years of community health experience and a track record of research and public health practice related to child undernutrition in India. Her papers on this topic have been published in PLOS Medicine, Lancet Global Health, PLOS One, and Social Science and Medicine, among others. She has received many research grants and undertaken extensive consulting opportunities. She joined the IIT Gandhinagar in July 2012 as an assistant professor. Some of the popular courses taught by her include theories of social epidemiology, applied statistics, writing course, and when you cannot experiment, social science methods, for which she also received a letter of recognition for teaching from Dean Academics at IITGN. Professor Subramanyam was also the member secretary of the Institute Ethics Committee at IITGN. She has been part of initiatives such as Quarantine Baatcheet and Student Wellbeing, which made the students see the human side of hers from close quarters. I can go on with her achievements and contributions, but let me make a humble attempt to describe what kind of a human being she was. Let this be stated that when two PhD students talk to each other, the reference to their supervisor inevitably comes. And most of the conversations can be broadly classified into few common themes: how their PhD supervisor scolded them, how they were in a bad mood that particular day, and how they were not giving them enough attention, enough time, and sometimes even enough care. My discussions, however, with the two PhD scholars of Malavika Ma'am, Anupam Sharma and Nilesh Tube, who are present here, were different. The discussions were different not because they did not center around the supervisor, rather, like all other conversations, they did, but because the conversations explored her magnanimity, her conduct as a thorough professional, how she was a perfect teacher who exactly understood the needs of her children. Above all, how she was a great human being who began the usual meetings with her students by asking how they were doing and following up on concerns, if they had any, from the earlier meetings. She helped her students financially without having asked for it. At this juncture, I'm reminded of a recent incident. The other day, Nilesh and I were putting up the poster of this memorial series at the guest house of the Institute. Nilesh, a curious human being as he is, asked the security personnel, pointing towards the picture of Professor Malavika Subramanyam, if he ever knew who she was. His eyes shone and he replied, "Haan, in ma'am ne meri beti ke admission ke liye 5,000 rupees diye the." That is, this ma'am contributed 5,000 rupees for my daughter's admission. This, in fact, is one of the many stories through which she lives with us in this campus. Stories of her compassionate lending of her years during quarantine Baatcheet, her passionate involvement in the research work, her dedication towards teaching, and her interaction with students as part of the Student Wellbeing Initiative. She justified them all. The Institute, recognizing her contribution, promoted her to the Associate Professor in December 2021. In her personal life, she was passionate about dancing and singing and was a die-hard fan of Bollywood, or to be precise, Amitabh Bachchan. She was known for her joie de vivre, the joy of living. For everyone she met, she greeted them with a disarming smile. Capturing few moments from her life, her family has compiled a video. We request you to stay tuned for the video.
When I was doing that at Manipal, I heard about public medical schools, or I had to do a PhD to teach in schools of public health. By then, I was fully a public health person, so I went on to do my doctoral studies. And in my doctoral studies, I was always interested in social factors and health behaviors. And the more I read about it, especially with related to how to change behaviors, behavior change programs, so to speak, that was very interesting to me. And the more I read about it and I asked people where should I apply and look at, so a senior professor at a conference said to me 2 words, Lisa Berkman. And I googled who Lisa Berkman was and found that she was at the Harvard School of Public Health. And I thought, while I'm applying to PhD, I will also apply to Harvard. But I was lucky, I got in and I got a full scholarship for 5 years. So I focused on the social determinants of health there, which is why I'm able to call myself a social epidemiologist.
मेरा चैन वैन सबूजना जालिम नजर हटा ले मेरा चैन वैन सबूजना जालिम नजर हटा ले बर्बाद हो रहे बर्बाद हो रहे तेरे अपने शहर वाले मेरा चैन वैन सबूजना जालिम नजर हटा ले बर्बाद हो रहे तेरे अपने शहर वाले तू
Make it better. You refrain. Slowly, Malavika. Na, 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 na. Hey, oh.
We have with us today Dr. Purnima Menon as our keynote speaker for the inaugural edition of the Malavika Memorial Lecture Series. Let me introduce Dr. Menon to our audience here. Dr. Purnima Menon is a Senior Director, Food and Nutrition Policy at the International Food Policy Research Institute, IFRI, and is based in New Delhi. She is also the Senior Research Fellow at Poverty, Health and Nutrition Division and South Asia Office, IFPRI. In her work in India, Dr. Menon directs POSHAN, which stands for Partnerships and Opportunities to Strengthen and Harmonize Actions for Nutrition in India. POSHAN is an initiative to support more use of evidence for nutrition in India. She conducts implementation research on scaling up maternal and child nutrition interventions, including on evaluating large-scale behavior change communications programs in nutrition and health. Dr. Menon has research experience in India, Bangladesh, Ethiopia, Haiti, Vietnam, and Nepal, and has published extensively and invests deeply in research translation in her engagements with policy communities. In addition to her research, Dr. Menon co-convenes a global nutrition policy course with the Institute for Development Studies in the United Kingdom. She has designed and taught many adaptations of this course in India as well. The title of her talk today is Research and Public Policy Intersections in the Context of Nutrition in India, In this talk, Dr. Menon will speak about generating evidence to help shape and support public policy on nutrition in India. She will also highlight key contributions of Dr. Malavika Subramanyam and reflect on the role of scientists in supporting policies and programs with high-quality evidence. The talk will be followed by a question and answer round. May I now request Dr. Purnima Menon to kindly join us. A huge round of applause for Dr. Purnima Menon. Dr. Menon, please.
Thank you so much. I should confess I had prepared a few sort of opening introductory remarks and I've lost all of it. But how could I not? It has been the most moving last 45 minutes, I think, that I have had in a long time. Celebrating Malavika's life, getting to meet her parents, her students, and to be here with all of you today. I regret not getting to know her personally because clearly we shared a love for dancing, which is not on my bio and clearly should be. So the next time, people know that we can celebrate life in so many different ways. But let me, of course, I dedicate the talk to her. I'm incredibly grateful to have been chosen by all of you to be here today. When we do science, we give a lot of talks. I do this a lot. You don't really ever think that you will end up giving a talk to celebrate the life of another scientist who went before their time. And so I'm deeply, deeply honored to be here with you all today. I want to thank you, Deepak, for the invitation. I want to thank the Subramanyans, Mala's parents, for your kindness today, your strength and your fortitude in what can only be an incredibly difficult time. I'm a mother. I'm also a daughter. And it's really meaningful to be here with you today to talk about the millions of other children who live in India, whose lives I think we all want to improve. I don't know that I can do justice to anything that has come before this. And I ask for your patience to bear with me in what I hope will not be a dry lecture, but instead I hope will be the celebration of science, a celebration of research. I really appreciated, sir, what you said, that it is our job to celebrate the best of humanity. And I think there is a lot to celebrate in the practice of science and in the art of taking science to make people's lives better. And I think a lot of the science, most of the science that Malavika did, well, all of the science that Malavika did, because it was grounded in society, it was grounded in understanding the world in which people live. I think it was clearly science that was dedicated to the idea of making people's lives better. I find great kinship with her in that brand of science. Similar things motivated me. I wasn't motivated to become a doctor, but I loved food as a child. I read recipe books from the day I was long as I can remember. And I studied nutrition to maybe become a chef. I still enjoy cooking. But through that journey, I discovered that a lot of people actually didn't have, firstly, I discovered that there was a lot of science in nutrition. There was biochemistry, there was microbiology, there was anatomy, there was physiology, and it was all very fascinating. But I think for me, the most influential moments were when I realized that many, many inequities in our society meant that most people in today's world don't get the food that they should get, don't get to live the lives that they should get, or that they should be able to live. And I realized that we have some power as scientists to do something about that by telling those stories, by showing that data, by bringing the tools that we have to tell, stories about things that other people that the people themselves may not have the power to tell. So what I'd like to do in my talk is to tell some of those stories, and I'll intersect them with the contributions that Malavika's work has made to honing our understanding of nutrition, especially child nutrition in India, to supporting the world of public policy with science, I hope to inspire some budding scientists in the room, although I think you needed no inspiration more than what we have already heard about Mala today. And I'd be more than happy to interact with some of you looking forward. I didn't bring my timer, so I'm going to ask maybe if somebody could give me a time check at about 20 minutes so that I don't take too long. Let me start not with science, but with public policy and say that moving an agenda, moving an entire country sometimes to pay attention to a particular issue and to work on that issue in public policy is complex. Doing the science that connects that is also complex. What does it take? It takes many, many, many people in our society, politicians, bureaucrats, the media, all of society to recognize that we have a problem. It takes those same people and maybe more to agree that, you know, we understand what causes that problem and that we can agree on some solutions to that problem. It then takes a whole lot more people to agree on policy instruments, to put the money towards them, to invest in those programs, and then to continue to learn about them. Through these long processes, and in my world now, in returning, I came back to India from the US in 2008. One also realizes over time as a scientist, because we stay in our world, that the evolution of science and evidence also has to move along with the evolution of politics, finance, policy, society, and more. And that really our journey in a sense of bringing, let's see how we can do this. From here. Okay, good, I'll use this mouse. That our journey of taking science to policy and even the movement of public policy itself is quite a bit like snakes and ladders. And at the end of the day, what we want to do as scientists is to help people climb the ladders, to try and make sure that there aren't too many big snakes in the way, so that as we move, society improves slowly but surely. And I think we've learned a lot about how to do this through examples such as the work that Malavika and I and others have done on nutrition. Now, I want to say a little bit about the program of work that I manage at IFPRI, because it's the program of work through which I have encountered many, many scientists across India, including people like Malavika. So our program is called Poshan. This is very different from the government's own national nutrition program, which is called Poshan Abhiyan. I have to confess, I was quite surprised when when it was unveiled. I don't claim any influence on that, of course. But we were given the task in 2011 when our program of work started to say, you need to pull together science and evidence in ways that support the movement of public policy for nutrition in India. It wasn't a small ask. And so we set about between 2011 and 12, really trying to understand what was going on around that issue. We did policy reviews. We tried to, so we write about here in the time frame, looked at the literature, looked at the evidence, talked to many people, and started to think about, well, what does it mean to do research and to connect research to people in this context? We then began a series of work, and a lot of it was focused on childhood undernutrition and childhood stunting, which Malavika had also worked on. And we're now here, we've been through 2 phases of this work. We continue to work with many different partners. We connect scientists through conferences. We meet scientists in critical policy spaces. And that's how I got to meet Malavika in 2 or 3 different places at 3IE, where she was doing some work to design an evaluation of the Gram Varta program, and at Niti Aayog, where she was supporting quite a lot of work. I think it was in the 17, 18, 19 timeframe. I think, Mala, we also met there, where they were doing an evaluation of the ICDS. The kinds of evidence that we as scientists bring together to support the policy community. So this is the kind of work that I do and my team does at IFPRI. And it's also turned out because I spent a lot of time trying to understand Malavika's work and preparing for this talk and listening to her and reading her papers. But this is the kind of work, firstly, helping people understand the problem. So research on the different types of malnutrition and their determinants, helping people understand what was going on with the solutions that we have. We've done some of that work, and she's also, of course, done quite a lot of work. And then on my team, we've also done some work on success stories in tackling malnutrition, because, at some level, quite frankly, we have had enough of hearing about the problem, and we really want to hear about successes from within India. Now, in the work that we do, which is again how I really got to know people like Malavika, is we recognize that it isn't just one single individual in any place who really makes change happen. Change happens through many, many, many different people coming together to align around recognizing that something is a problem. When I started work on childhood malnutrition in India in 2008, the discourse was nothing like it is today. The science and the kinds of papers that we see are nothing like we have today. And in a sense, what we have today is a proliferation of scientists of all disciplines across India who have decided that this is a problem that is grand enough that it deserves attention from everyone, whether you're someone who studies the biochemistry and the molecular biology of what happens in cells that don't get enough nutrition, to people who study what happens in moving policy machines. And Malavika's work was somewhere in the middle of that grand spectrum, just like mine, on social epidemiology and on understanding what happens in public policy. So in our world, we connect, and we try to connect people who do science and people who do policy and bring things together. And this is the context in which I also had the privilege to get to know her. In our work, we also do a lot of work on communications and connecting people around data and evidence, and again, created many opportunities to get to know her, particularly in our work on directly engaging with policy counterparts making big decisions, such as those at Niti Aayog. Now, I want to say a little bit about why I care about malnutrition, partly because I think these are the same kinds of things that inspire people like Malavika, and I hope inspire many other people to focus on this as a particular topic. Over time, the research that many, many people have done has helped us understand that most children in India die because they're malnourished. 70% almost of India's babies who die today, many hundreds of thousands of them, die because they're malnourished. They don't die just because they had an infectious disease. They don't die just because they got sick. They die because that sickness or that infectious disease comes on top of malnutrition. Malnutrition is by far the biggest driver of non-communicable diseases. India is the diabetes capital of the world. We have large numbers of people with hypertension and with heart disease. All of these are underpinned by malnutrition, including in the early years. Malnutrition contributes to cognitive impairments, and we understand that there are intergenerational impacts of poor nutrition. And last but not least, we understand that there are linkages between being malnourished early in life and losses both to individuals and to society. This is what inspired me to work on malnutrition. I have no doubt that it is among the many things that inspired someone like Malavika to work on the same topic. We also have understood over time that there is no single malnutrition challenge. Malnutrition exists everywhere. It exists around us. It maybe even exists among some of us in this room. It manifests in many different ways. It manifests as stunting among children, the map on your left, highly concentrated in northern districts across India, but also in several parts of southern states. It manifests as anemia among women and the broader population, and it also manifests as overweight or obesity among both men and women. So you can choose to work on malnutrition and be inspired to work on it, regardless of which way you choose to look at it. In the work that I'll speak about today, it really is more focused on childhood stunting. So where we are in India, taking those 4 things that I had mentioned earlier in terms of recognizing that we have a problem, agreeing on its drivers, agreeing on policy instruments, and then investing and looking ahead, is the journey that I want to tell you a little bit about. So the process of recognizing that India has a malnutrition challenge, measured in this case by childhood stunting, was a journey that took almost 5 years. So when the 2007 NFHS data came out, there was a lot of problem denial in the initial years around childhood stunting. There were people who said, well, no, India's children grow differently. We must apply different growth standards to Indian children. There was confusion around what did stunting mean, whether it's a complex biological process or a statistical indicator. Do we use it to measure individuals or measure populations? And what is the job of scientists in this situation? Our job is to help cut through that clutter, to do the research that helps people understand that this problem is still a problem, that it is an undeniable problem, that it is a problem that is worthy of our attention as a society. I'll share some of Malavika's papers that made critical contributions to this in those years. So this is almost, I would say, between 2007-8 and 2012-13, we were still debating whether stunting was a problem, okay? After that, there was work to decide, well, what causes this? What is the problem here? You know, is it sanitation? Is it gender? Is it multisectoral? What are the solutions that must be in place to tackle this problem? Here again, her work has had a profound impact. There are some key papers that have come from her work that have contributed to that. And then we get to the point of, well, are we going to do something about it? And what are we going to do about it? And there you look at policy instruments and where India has been. You know, a lot of our work on tackling malnutrition has been in the ICDS. Food and feeding, and the food and feeding bias, I would call it, has remained strong. Understanding the quality, the reach, and the equity of the ICDS program has been a big part of research that needed to be done. Again here, you know, some of Malavika's work has been critical there. Today in India, we are in a new solution space. There is a lot of discussion about behavior change. I recall that she mentioned that in her interests as well, about the need for multisectorality. But unfortunately, some of the things that she, I think, was most passionate about is the recognition of the importance of social determinants. And we are still lagging on that. We're especially lagging on actions to tackle the social determinants. And last but not least, of course, we need a lot of work to do on still, it's interesting to me that in some ways we're almost back to the problem recognition cycle, because again, now in the news, and some of you may be, you know, it's remarkable to me. I saw a piece by Chetan Bhagat, of all people, the other day, who decided he had the qualifications to speak about, you know, India's growth standards. So this is where we have reached in the nutrition discourse in India. As you can see, it's a bit of a cycle. There's a lot of clutter, and our job as scientists is to continue to help to cut through that clutter. Now, I want to speak a little bit about the problem recognition piece, because this is a big one. As I mentioned, it took almost 5 years from 2008 when it was accepted, you know, broadly as a shame and as a curse by the then Prime Minister, to several years of work where people tried to deny the growth standards. There was then a 6-paper series in the Economic and Political Weekly, which maybe we need to resurrect 10 years later, that basically reminded people that it didn't matter whether you looked at the problem as a nutritionist, an activist, you know, a public health professional. You'll recognize many names of the authors who wrote about this in that EPW piece. Stunting was still a challenge for India's children, and something that India's children actually deserved to have better recognition of more than anything else. Now, in understanding the drivers of stunting, Malavika's work played quite an important role, because she was one of the few people, together with work that I had done, that really forced people to recognize that the underpinnings of childhood stunting in India are complex, that they are grounded in social determinants, and that we shouldn't try to seek a single magic bullet or a single magic reason for it. The fault was really in the many things that were not going on. So I want to point out a couple of papers of hers in the course of this. The first is this paper, which in 2011, you know, in that period when there was a lot of contestation, really spoke to the issue and the linkages of the connections between economic growth and childhood undernutrition. In this work that she did together with her mentors, and I want you to mark this point. This is work that she did with her mentors. You'll see later in my talk that some of the more critical contributions later have come from work that her students did with her as a mentor, which speaks a lot to, you know, her own sort of professional journey. But this paper made important contributions to shaping our understanding about the determinants and really made the case for focused interventions and strategies. It was one of many papers that, in a sense, forced the development of a multisectoral strategy to tackle childhood undernutrition, the Nourishing India strategy. She also brought to her work and to our understanding as a broader policy and research community work that really highlighted the importance of looking at social inequalities in the context of undernutrition. So again, this piece of work done together with her mentors was grounded in the frame of social epidemiology. And what it did was highlight the importance of examining disparities and examining trends in those disparities. It isn't enough that we say some people are not doing well enough. What we need to see in countries is that disparities begin to close. That's when we know that we have changed the conditions in which children grow over time. So in her work, which tracked data until about 2007, she showed that in fact the disparities had not gone away even over that period. What we are now able to see looking at data since 2007, really since the advent of a range of different policies by the government of India then that aim to tackle a range of different social inequalities in access to health through the National Rural Health Mission, in improvements in poverty, through the scaling up of many social welfare programs, et cetera, is that today we're beginning to see those disparities close. Now we move to looking at some actions. And what's interesting, of course, in the context of India's landscape, and I realize this is a complicated slide, but the key message is all that matters, which is that when we look at the science of how to tackle nutrition, this figure is from, and those interventions on the side of direct health interventions, indirect health interventions, other sectoral strategies that directly affect nutrition, and sectoral strategies that indirectly affect nutrition. Of course, India's policy landscape is quite replete with these policies. Our challenges are in understanding how these policies and programs reach people. Again, lenses of social epidemiology and equity are critical to bring here, and she did that in her work on the ICDS. Is to understand now, and scientists have a big role to play in understanding how public policy solutions actually reach people. Social scientists have a big role to play. Epidemiologists have a big role to play there. And I think she did that in ways that were really exemplary. She was a key contributor to work on Poshan Abhiyan. I know she spent a lot of time working with Niti Aayog. In our work that we've done together with Niti Aayog, we found that a lot of things were moving on the policy front. They reminded us how complex it is, even once program proclamations are made, to actually move the policy machinery to deliver on those programs. Mala's work on the ICDS and various aspects of it have made critical contributions to scientific understanding and to people supporting policy around different aspects of this program. So she has a key paper on the reach and utilization of the program. I know she's done research on the quality of take-home rations, and I know she, William Joe, and Mala and others have also done a big, really big study on the governance and implementation of the ICDS. These are examples of how science can connect with policy. And I think for the scientists in the room or the scientists who are listening to this talk elsewhere, this is something that we must and we can remember, that we have a great deal of power as scientists to shape what happens in our context and in countries we care about by doing science on what happens in public policy, by looking at who benefits, who's left out, by bringing our training, by bringing our lenses and our ways of doing science to it. And I think she brought a very strong social epidemiology lens to doing that science. I'm going to skip that. I want to again reflect on the lenses that Mala brings to her work or brought to her work in thinking and helping people think about the importance of society and social inequalities in how life works. And I think it takes that kind of work to really remind us that the malnutrition challenge that India faces will take much more than a nutrition program like the ICDS to solve. It will take many people, many scientists, many policymakers, many program implementers to stay together around a multifaceted agenda for change. We need change to happen, and we need science on food systems. We need change and science on social systems and economic systems and health systems. And it really, nutrition to me is a great reminder that many people can come together to look at a problem in many different ways and contribute their great science to help society make change. We have really no time to lose. India's progress on the Sustainable Development Goals of 2030 will actually be captured on children born starting in 2025. So in about 2029, all countries are going to do these surveys that look at what happened to the children who were born in the 5 years as we led up to the SDGs. Those surveys in 2029 will capture those children who were born in 2025. What does that mean for what we do today? It means that what we do today must focus on what is going on with the lives of adolescents and people, young people in society today. Here again, I think Mala was ahead of her time because she did a lovely paper on looking at what was happening within homes and what would be happening in the homes of those children who are going to be born in 2025. Her very recent paper, and this paper for me is an example of her mentorship. Unlike the other paper that I showed earlier, which was an example of her being mentored by some of her mentors at Harvard, this is a piece of work where her mentorship shines. It's one of the first papers, I think, to examine intra-household attitudes, what happens within families and their relationship to childhood undernutrition. It reminds us that a critical pathway to changing what happens to children is changing what happens in their families. And that to change that, we have to reshape what happens in terms of how mothers and fathers come together to support their children. She also recognized that it was really important that we focus in on understanding what was happening with adolescents. This is what I meant when I said what happens to India, what we see in terms of India's progress on SDGs for children born in 2025 is going to be completely dependent on what is happening with adolescents today, in 2024 and in 2025 and beyond. And her research on highlighting the role of societal context and by using a very interesting metric, the average education levels of older women in any community is just a very clever way of reminding us that that societal context in which young girls and young boys today grow is going to determine, in a sense, their future and the future of this country. So as I said, I think she was a little ahead of her time there. So where I stand in terms of childhood undernutrition, childhood stunting, and our intersections and our role as scientists is that we still have a long road ahead and strong roles to play. This is an issue that is still standing. I want to remind us again that a lot of these things that we're working on, especially insights on what needs to happen on social determinants, and now in my world, certainly, some of the work that we've been doing on studying successes in the context of India are still not embedded in the strategy. I want to remind us again of the role of social determinants by sharing with you the last piece of research now from my research team on looking at how stunting has changed in states that were successful at reducing stunting in India. We studied 4 states, including the state that we stand in today. We studied Chhattisgarh, Gujarat, Orissa, and Tamil Nadu. And across all 4 of those states, we found that the conditions in which people live, the social conditions of people's lives, not just the health and nutrition programs that the government decides to deliver, contribute tremendously to how stunting has improved over time. We found that, of course, policies will evolve. The ICDS program that we talk about a lot is just one of the many things that has needed to change to actually contribute to changes in stunting, and that the states that were successful have always added to national efforts by going local, by drawing on the best of their understanding of local challenges, and by addressing social issues in a local context. A vision to address an outcome at a political level, but across society in these states was important. Capable and stable bureaucrats who were given space and time to implement programs was important. Politicians who put money towards programs were important. And catalysts and champions of all kinds, including scientists, have played a critical role there. More recently on our research team, we've studied the state of Bihar. I don't know if if there are people here from Bihar in this room, but I think if you hear the word Bihar in India, you're not used to hearing about it as a success case. Well, we have new research now that shows that because of the work that many, many people have been done, informed by science, stunting has reduced at a faster between 2016 and 2020 compared to what happened before that. Again, our study of what contributed to those successes reminds us of the importance of social determinants. We found that sanitation, women's education, socioeconomic well-being are some of the most important contributors to reducing child malnutrition. Again, I want to remind you that these are some of the things that Mala has spent her life reminding us about, the importance of social determinants. Our challenge now is to connect these things with our political leadership, to get people to acknowledge that it is not enough to simply deliver a program like the ICDS, that if we want to solve malnutrition in this country, we need to really invest in improving many, many facets of people's lives. I'm going to skip that as well. I want to close by talking about science and the role that scientists who care about supporting public policy can play. And I hope that this inspires and helps us sort of remember Mala, because I think she was one of those scientists who cared to use her science, her art, her craft to support the kind of work that makes other people's lives better. So what can we do as scientists who care about supporting public policy? Firstly, we have to stay true to the science. Zero compromise on science. And I think for me, that is very, very, very clear when I see the kind of science that Mala did. You know, she published her science in peer-reviewed papers. This is what every scientist must do. We have to get our science out, not be afraid of what people will think about the results. Because sometimes the results of the science we do is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for society, it's uncomfortable for politics. But the most important thing that we can do as scientists is stay true to the science, stay grounded in the science and in data and evidence. At the same time, we have to embrace complexity. We have to recognize that science itself is complex, but also that scientists are complex. We have to all work with scientists from many different fields to be able to move a field. The world of nutrition today has moved in India because scientists from across the world, epidemiologists like Mala, economists in other places, people who study nutrition from a biological perspective, people who do implementation research on programs, have all been able to somehow come together to connect all of our science to help understand a problem that is so important for our society. I think scientists have to be available to other people. We have to be proactive to connect our science to other policies. We have to connect and bring others in. We have to not be shy. Sometimes, and I know all of us as scientists, and Mala and I have also talked about this before, when we take our science to settings of public policy, it is not always a comfortable space for us as scientists, because that world is very different from our world as scientists. The way science is communicated, the way science is interpreted in public policy settings is very different from how we may do it in a room like this. And I think Mala was open to that. She was ready for that. So she was a scientist who was willing and able to bring her science and her methods to places which are even uncomfortable for us sometimes as scientists. We have to recognize our limited power as scientists, but also we can never give up. You know, her quest was to get people to pay attention to social determinants. And I think she was remarkably successful in doing that. We have to invest in teaching, but also we have to invest in learning. And I think from everything that I have heard and seen so far, there was no question about the fact that as a scientist, she was a lifelong learner. I have a lot of things for what policymakers can do about science as well, but this is not an audience of policymakers. But I think that what we want is for them to stay informed and for them to value and listen to scientists. One of the things that I have realized over the many years is that scientists stay, you know, we just keep doing our research on the same kinds of things, sometimes different things, but we are really a permanent fixture in many parts of society. The knowledge community is a permanent fixture. We teach, we do research. We don't change our professions that quickly because we love what we do. Politicians may change, you know, people in bureaucracies may change, people in agencies may change. But in fact, scientists kind of we're stick with it kind of people, you know, and we have to use that power. We have to use the power, the fact that we stay with our problems, we continue to study them, we dissect them one way and then we dissect them the other, we go against our own findings, and we're not afraid to do that. But that's a bit of power that scientists have actually to help public policy. And I hope that many of us in this room who are scientists will continue to do that. So I want to end in closing with a tribute to Malavika, who, as I mentioned, I really regret not knowing her as a person, because truly, I know that we would have enjoyed dancing together among many other things. My meetings and interactions with her were almost always around some kind of a scientific table. But in tribute to her, I just want to say that, her growth as a scientist and a professional and a teacher is there for us to see in her work. The legacy that scientists leave behind, both in the papers they publish, but also especially in the people that they engage with, is really the true testament. That is our legacy. And in her work, what I have seen is, her development in terms of developing methodological work with her mentors, to shaping and deepening the research in the context upon her return to India. And finally, to her contributions to training and working with younger scientists as a mentor. She had many more years to give to her students, to her community, and to her country, of course. And I think the best that any and all of us can do is to carry forward her legacy by investing in science for social progress. Doing that requires us to be really true to the quest of science, to the scientific method, to the purity of data, and to reducing bias in how we do research, communicate research, and use science. What she seems to clearly have taught us is that we also have to dance along that way. I want to thank you again for having me here today. It has been probably one of the greatest privileges in my professional career to be able to stand here in front of her parents, in front of the two of you, and her students and her mentors, and to offer these words as a token of my appreciation as someone who knew her from her work and was not privileged to know her as much as a person, to celebrate her life and her legacy. Thank you so much again.
We are privileged to have with us today Dr. Mala Ramanathan, who is a statistician, demographer with training in medical anthropology and bioethics. She is currently a faculty member of the Dr Menon Center for Health Science Studies, SCTIMST, Thiruvananthapuram, Kerala. She is a member of the Ethics Committee of the Institute for Research in Medical Statistics, ICMR, New Delhi, and Health Action by People, Thiruvananthapuram. Her current focus of work is maternal and child health, gender and chronic morbidity, with special reference to diabetes mellitus and ethics in health research. She's on the editorial board of the Indian Journal of Medical Ethics, an indexed peer-reviewed journal of the Forum for Medical Ethics Society, Mumbai. Dr. Ramanathan has several publications, including papers, book reports, and chapters related to areas of her interest. May I now request all of you to welcome Dr. Ramanathan. Dr. Ramanathan, please.
Good evening, and it's a privilege to be here, to be talking about, and I would have rather not talked about her, but have her around. But it's a privilege that to be able to stand here and share a few words about my professional affiliation with Malavika, which is about 8 to 9 years now. And I'm really very happy to be here, and particularly thankful to Dr. Deepak Singhania for organizing it, and her students for facilitating this process of remembering Malavika with joy, and the work that she did, sharing it with others, retelling those stories, because when we retell the stories, we let it go more far and wide, and remember with pleasure and with a certain smile on our faces. And I think I am also going to try to do just that, because as Dr. Menon said, I knew Malavika professionally, and I have to tell her parents, I didn't know that she could dance so beautifully. I never knew. What I did know was that we shared a common love for different kinds of rare Tamilian dishes, which took us back in memory to our childhood. And a lot of that you have actually brought back to me from my childhood when I visited Bangalore to work with her all those 4 years ago. And what I'm going to talk today, though I would love to talk about the food part, is the work that I did with Malavika. And I want to emphasize particularly on an academic singular contribution that she had started to make, which I noticed because it's one of my fortes and it's a rare thing in public health. And I'm hoping that her legacy enables us to take that particular aspect of her work. And I see all her students around, and I hope it lives, it thrives. And, you know, we will remember Malavika 10 years down the road for this particularly singular contribution that she has started in research in public health. I met her at a conference. I had corresponded with her, but I think it was 2012 or 13 because one doesn't remember specific years when one keeps attending weird conferences all over the place. So this was some conference at the Institute for Economic Growth in Delhi, North Delhi, where we were sitting in, as usual, as women are wont to be, in the second row, not the first row, and whispering to each other, even though we didn't know each other very well, about some presentation which ignored a gender aspect, which troubled both of us. And we could, just by making eye contact, you know, immediately recognize kindred souls to, you know, what shall I call, backbite over the absence of gender lens. And that was the start of the conversation with her. And I found that she was working with another colleague of mine, and we did an evaluation of the Mehtari Jatan program of the government of Chhattisgarh subsequently. And I will tell you a little bit about that, because this particular program, its success was in the HMIS data already. But what they wanted to know was its processes, which is what her students have talked about extensively. And so we were out there in the villages looking at Anganwadis, who comes to eat, what do they like to eat, what do they not like about the stuff, what incentivizes them, and what prevents them from coming to. This was the hot cooked meal for pregnant women. And then I came down, I had been coming to IIT Gandhinagar as part of their ethics committee sometime in the historical, maybe 10 years or something. But I barely knew Malavika. I was helping a wee bit by facilitating the SOPs, by sharing SOPs from my institute. And I came down here to facilitate the training, or something of a training of trainers for the ICDS project, which was getting started then. And that was my original role. But for those of you who know qualitative research, it's an iterative process where the analysis of incoming data facilitates the ongoing research process. So rough and ready analysis has to be done before you move to other states to see what the changing focuses should be. So that is where I went to Bangalore and met her mother and stayed there to do the work. And then the more recent engagement was reviewing her students' PhD thesis as an external examiner. And posthumously, the one piece of work that I did was being the working editor, the Indian Journal of Medical Ethics. I'm a working editor of it, and we get papers which are sent. We lead it's like the editor in the +1. We lead it, we recommend reviewers, we collect the reviews, we collate it, send it back and judge it, and we shepherd the paper through to publication. And so I reviewed her work, but I didn't know it was her, because the paper was circulated to us with the name of her student's surname. And so only when the galley proof came, we knew that Malavika was, and that was very embarrassing for me because I had to write to the editor and give an explanation as to why I don't have any conflict of interest, because I didn't know that Malavika was an author of the paper. So I am the named working editor on it because I didn't know that she was author of that paper. So in Chhattisgarh, we were in the Mehtari Jatan. One thing which we shared in common is we would go from Anganwadis to a few homes around to get an understanding of using what anthropologists call participant observation. So we would just walk into homes, you know, invariably sit on the floor and start chatting with the women in that house. And we found stacked THR rations, you know, in that green or different colored bags in a corner. And we found ways and means to, you know, poke our noses into what happens to them. Very revealing, but Malavika and I had done that, bending our heads through the houses. In Chhattisgarh, the chowkat is small. So, I mean, while I am not very tall, but Malavika could go through, I couldn't. I had to really, we had to jump over the chowkat, go in, but we'd sit there in the kitchens and in their homes on the floor, you know, saying no, people would come inevitably offering chairs. We would sit there. We found out quite a lot in that expeditions. But what I realized is she was the PI of some projects, but when we went to the field, she was an investigator. I mean, there was none of that PI-ness about her. We could, I mean, she would be with her students doing her data collection. And, you know, she wore Western clothes at times. And let me be honest, I would be very scared because one of our training tells us that we have to look like the community. But she had the phenomenal ability to dissemble in that community, meaning it didn't matter what she wore. She could sit on the floor cross-legged and gossip with them without, you know, speaking the exact Hindi back at them. And that, you know, asking, nodding head and asking questions, whispering with me and carrying that conversation and connecting with those women, the Anganwadi workers. And that was my experience of the work in Mehtari Jatan. The ICDS project was one, my main role was training the researchers. But subsequently, because this had to be done and a lot, you know, we teach qualitative research globally, nationally as well. But as in my institution, as it is in most institutions, we teach the methods of data collection. We don't teach the process of data analysis as effectively. So there were very few people who could do that rough and ready. And so Malavika called me saying this has to be done because we have to revise the tools to go to the other states. So I thought, okay, there was a weekend. I took 2 extra days of earned leave and said, I will somehow sneak out for 4 days, but you have to find me a table and you have to find me as in when I do stuff, someone who will type up the stuff and be just at my beck and call for typing. And in exchange, you have to give me curd rice and pickles. That's all is what I need. So she said, yes, I'll organize your curd rice and pickles, 2 large tables and all the transcripts, and come and do that. So over the next 4 days, I didn't think my typist would be Malavika, but my typist was Malavika. The 2 of us stayed cooped up in one room there with absolute 1 fan, okay, mostly switched off because we would tear up the papers for coding and we didn't want them to fly. Fortunately, it was Bangalore and the switching off of the fan didn't really make a big difference, but we worked. And that is when I understood her transcripts were meticulous. The meanings, when I went back, the translations had their original Gujarati words. She had written them in brackets, so I could go back and forth and understand the underlying meanings attached to it when people explain the burden of work, the Anganwadi workers and helpers. And I have to be honest to tell you something bad. I am obsessive about work when I start. And that is the nature of qualitative research. You imbibe it, you have to soak in it, and you can't come out of it till you've finished. So when I'm in that stage, I'm not a good person. I don't think I'm a good person. But in that situation, I'm a horrible person. In the sense, nothing else I can see but the data, the coding, and the work. Maybe eating occasionally and using nature's call kind of stuff. So she stood that. And I didn't know who was in that room. I kept producing, she kept producing back, because it's an iterative process in qualitative analysis. I didn't know it was day or night. Only when I had to go to sleep, I would go, and then she would go. We managed it, and she worked. She managed to withstand, because she disconnected herself from the routine work of IIT, everything else, kept the phone away, and we worked that way to finish. So she could disconnect from work pressure and work. And constantly through that process, we didn't need to tell each other. No, we could, the notes, the transcripts were telling us about the gendered nature of the Anganwadi workers' responsibilities at home. The importance of, we began to recognize the importance of convergence and also the politics of being the women and child department in that process. The power that accrues to a revenue secretary is not the same power that accrues to a woman and child department secretary. And those were the things about convergence, which, you know, are stuff which we understood from those transcripts. And this is the ICDS work where all of us, including Purnima, are named. This is what I talked about. And one of the things we recognized while sifting and identifying was, you know, everyone tells you the story of infrastructural requirements for Anganwadi centers. Those transcripts from Gujarat told us the meaning of the infrastructure, what it means at individual level. It's stuff like, see, if the Anganwadi doesn't have 4 walls, Purnima mentioned the lack of, and the ICDS project report also talks about the supply chain limitation and the lack of storage. It's supposed to be stored in the Anganwadi. If the Anganwadi doesn't have walls or has dampness in it or holes in the windows, the rats come and get the stuff that has come there. So she has to keep it in her house. What happens in the community is people say she takes it home. She doesn't take it home because she wants to feed her children. She takes it home because she's accountable and she needs to keep it safe, and she has nowhere to keep it safe. And what happens is the trust in the Anganwadi is eroded. These were small things which are very crucial, which we understood when we did those transcripts. We understood the relevance of caste. No matter how the Anganwadi worker tries to overcome it at community level, the social determinants, it keeps coming again and again. We recognize the problem of working mothers. It's there in the report for requirement for crushes, but it was very poignant what the women said. The women said, when a child who is eligible for coming to Anganwadi, and there is another younger or older child who is going to get left alone, and that child comes with a brother or sister, how can we not feed that child? And how I have to account, so I can't feed the child, and how can I send the child away? So mothers invariably don't send their children because they have 3 children to feed and only 1 child can come to the Anganwadi. So where do I send the other children? Because she goes for work. So she either leaves them alone or she takes them with her. So that's another reason why children don't go to Anganwadi, not because they don't want to, but because mothers are also egalitarian in their own ways. And that's when we recognize the relevance of crushes. It's in part of the recommendation. And last, it's one of the last things, this PhD work, which brings me to the singular contribution of Malavika's. This thesis had used a range of methods, Ankita Shah's thesis. The first was a mixed method study using an embedded study design where the qualitative study, as she identified people in the quantitative study, they looked at explanations for the quantitative findings, and they actually offer inputs to the key findings, clarity on why nutrition program effect does not yield the benefit it should. The second was a randomized control trial designed to deliver a health promotion curriculum. And it starts by actually developing one. And because it got affected by COVID, it did not demonstrate as effective, but it would have been very effective because it was very planned with great nuance, using PT teachers to run the training, counting the number of trainings in terms of, it was a classic RCT in using social determinants. The third study looked at how context, this is what Purnima talked about, in markedly homogeneous context can influence nutritional status of adolescents using a multi-level framework, and looked at the salience of the presence of an educated woman in the household. It actually started with a theory-laden model building exercise to establish across 3 areas using multi-method and paradigmatic approach to look at the advantage of using a theory-laden approach to looking at health, education, nutrition, and well-being. And it went on to ground it empirically using these 3 different studies, looking at Nancy Krieger's ecosocial theory to develop the models for testing and the interventions. And this is the last piece, which I told you was, to my embarrassment, I had to write that I had no conflict of interest. This is the work, Jagrati Gangopadhyay and Malavika Subramanyam, Theory and Health Disparities, explaining the relevance of theory in public health research in India, actually looking at published research to see how different it would be if a theory had informed it. Looking at a review, address quantitative public health studies do not integrate theoretical considerations. This qualitative study uses content analysis to explore the application of theory in Indian public health articles listed on PubMed. Social determinants such as poverty, income, social class, education, gender, caste, socioeconomic position, socioeconomic status, very rare to make that distinction in the Indian context. Immigrant status and wealth were the key words that were used to identify. And she analyzed these studies to show how different the findings were and how much more grounded they were when they were informed by theory. This is her significant, according to me, contribution that I hope goes on, bringing theory to the pragmatic. See, in public health, we are utilitarian. We want solutions and we want them yesterday. And so we don't have time for theory. We think theory is for the rich. We need to go out there and solve problems for people to live better. And Malavika's work shows us that theory actually enables far more pragmatic solutions to program development in public health. She has systematically, through the work of her students and her own work, demonstrated the value addition to public health considerations that emerge out of bringing theory to practice. Imbibing this understanding to her students who've actually gone out there and applied. I hope it flourishes. I hope that the spirit with which she started that work flourishes with her students who stand here, all of you today, because this is a phenomenal contribution. Something that the public health world as yet doesn't recognize. It should, and its worth is worth gold. Thank you.
Now we have with us Dr. Rajan Sankar, who's going to join us remotely in this memorial series. Before he begins, let me introduce Dr. Sankar to our audience. Dr. Rajan Sankar is a founding director at the India Nutrition Initiative, TINI, and senior advisor for nutrition at the Tata Trust. Prior to joining the trust, Dr. Sankar was country manager, India and regional representative, South Asia, Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, that is GAIN, and supported GAIN's program development and grant management in India. Prior to joining GAIN, Dr. Sankar was a project officer in the Child Development and Nutrition section of UNICEF in India. In 2001, he retired as a colonel from the Army Medical Corps after 24 years of service. He's a graduate in medicine from the University of Madras with a specialization in internal medicine and endocrinology. He has published over 100 scientific papers in national and international journals. So please welcome Dr. Sankar with a huge round of applause.
At the outset, my sincere apologies that I'm not there in person. I joined this meeting on my behalf and on behalf of all my colleagues from the Health and Nutrition section of Tata Trust. Malavika was a genuinely warm individual and a great friend of mine. While we mourn the loss of Malavika, we pay tribute and celebrate a life that was well lived, a life committed to science, as many before me very clearly brought out. Not many leave behind a legacy of such dedication and accomplishment. I first contacted Malavika when I read her paper, Is Economic Growth Associated with Reduction in Child Undernutrition? When this paper was published, it attracted a lot of attention, because that was a time that India had consistently robust economic growth for over a decade. And it is also the time when a lot more data on child nutrition was available in public domain. And it was generally perceived that economic growth will automatically improve child nutrition. And this paper, Malavika clearly showed, as Purnima was saying, is one of those that are necessary, maybe necessary, but certainly not sufficient. And she showed clearly in that paper that direct investments in appropriate health interventions may be essential to reduce child undernutrition. That interaction with her started my personal friendship with her and Malavika's continuing support to the programs. At that time, I was working with the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, with GAIN, and subsequently with Tata Trust. Then I invited her from the Tata Trust to deliver the first lecture in the series of lectures that we started within the Trust and the Tata Trust ecosystem. And her keynote was on social determinants of health. I must say that this lecture helped a lot of my colleagues to develop a kind of a friendship and depend on Malavika as a mentor for many programs that they conceptualized, implemented, evaluated. And so she was more a mentor for a lot of my colleagues and a lot of the programs that we did. On concrete terms, subsequently, when the Tata Trust launched a major program to support the National Nutrition Mission called the Nutrition Fellowship Program. It's called the Swasth Bharat Prerak Program. We had about 380 young men and women, fresh graduates out of college, working at that many districts, supporting the district administration and implementation of the National Nutrition Mission. Over a 3-year period, we had more than 800 preraks working for varying periods from 12 to 36 months. And we wanted Malavika to take a look at that program, more to say what are the lessons to learn from them, what has been the contribution of Prerex to implementation of the National Nutrition Mission. I think along with Malavika and Anupam, Aishwarya, they helped us and they did a detailed formative study. They captured the key learnings and it was very well received by both the Tata Trust and the Ministry of Women and Child Development. Then we requested her to also do a study of the take-home ration models implemented by different states in the country. I think Malavika, along with Anupam and Dimple, they brought together a team and they did detailed qualitative research to understand the different models and how they're being implemented in different parts of the country. And this is a big contribution to understanding the THR landscape in the country. I must admit that she has been a great, these are just two examples, but overall she has been a kind of a mentor to our programs. We could reach out to her and ask her for any support for our program evaluation or even in designs. She has been a great influence to our health and nutrition teams at Tata Trust. I, on behalf of my colleagues and on my own behalf, would like to place here on record our gratitude. As many before me said, life can be fleeting, but a life lived to the fullest stays in the fond memories. And I'm sure from what we have heard and what we have known of her, Malavika's was one. And I just join you all in agreeing that the best that we can do for her is to fully further the scientific rigor and the areas that she dwelled on and did. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sankar, for joining us remotely. And finally, we have with us one of the doctoral students of Professor Malavika Subramanyam, Dr. Mukta Gundi. Dr. Gundi is a public health researcher interested in exploring how social conditions influence health. Her interests include understanding how social and gender inequalities intersect to impact adolescents' health indicators. A doctoral student from IIT Gandhinagar, who graduated in August 2020, Dr. Gundi worked as a technical specialist with the Population Council, New Delhi. She co-led baseline data collection for a community-based evaluation program aimed at skilling in-school and out-of-school adolescent girls to reduce the incidences of child marriage in Rajasthan. Her research work included contributing to an evidence synthesis of experimental studies from South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa that were aimed at delaying marriage, reducing teenage pregnancy, and improving labor force participation among adolescent girls and young women. She's also co-authored research briefs, analyzed data, designed research tools, and supervised data collection. So please welcome Dr. Mukta Gundi with a huge round of applause.
Thank you, Pankaj. Manoj. Thank you, Manoj. This was not needed. You could have just said, Mukta is Malavika's student, always. Good evening, everyone. I'm visiting my alma mater for the first time since I submitted my thesis in October 2019. Because of the COVID pandemic, my defense, my graduation happened online. And not even in my worst dreams had I imagined that I would be visiting IIT Gandhinagar for my Dear Professor's Memorial Lecture Series. When I was here as a student from December 2014 to 2019, and even before that, I have worked with Malavika for 2 years. Every single day, I have spoken with her. Today is probably one of the toughest days of my life when I'll be speaking about her, and that too using the past tense. Dr. Purnima has shared, even Dr. Mala ma'am, Dr. Rajan Sankar they have shared Malavika's contribution as a researcher, especially in the field of undernutrition and public health. What I'm going to do today, what I'm going to share today is her contribution as a teacher, as a research mentor in my academic journey. And I'm kind of trying to locate what that contribution means in the journey of public health researcher. I can actually go on speaking about her for several hours, so please pardon me for using this. This is just to support myself so that I stick to time and have a focused sort of speech. As we know, public health has long been dissociated from the public. The pure biomedical approach of looking at people's health outcomes has resulted in solutions that seem to be nicely packaged in programs. But in many ways, several times we realize that they are self-defeating. This is because these biomedical solutions rarely go back to the social, cultural, economic roots of inequalities and injustices that have existed, which continue to exist. This is precisely why we have newer medications coming up for treating diseases, but we fail to address the issues of health equity. We have all new kinds of technologies, apps which can track our moods, but we fail to address the root causes of trauma. We have researchers who present data on, maybe reproductive morbidities among women without really locating these women's health experiences in the social fabric in India. I think this is how my journey began. I was a candidate with a fresh Master of Public Health program, wanting to work with Malavika as a research associate, with quite a narrow understanding of what social epidemiology means. I knew the measures of morbidity and mortality. Of course, I had learned epidemiology in my MPH, but had not quite learned the importance of asking why to the unequal distribution of these morbidities and mortalities in the population. I remember the day in my first semester when she had called me with a kind of conceptual model for my idea of working on menstrual hygiene. My model kind of looked perfect to me. I had all kinds of placeholders in that diagram and that fancy PPT. And I was quite excited about impressing my supervisor in the first semester itself. Malavika patiently listened to me, wholeheartedly appreciated my efforts of putting together that conceptual model. And just looking into my eyes, she asked me, Mukta, you've been saying menstrual hygiene. Do you think menstrual hygiene is a synonym with menstrual health? I fumbled. And I think my journey of exploration began with that question. When I would begin discussing with her, Malavika, this is how I feel I should be doing my data collection in urban and rural Maharashtra, she would make me pause and she would bring me back to the question of what exactly I meant by urban and if I think urban is a homogeneous entity. When I would speak about adolescents, she made me do exploratory visits to meet a sex educationist, to learn more about adolescents, to learn more about menstruation. She made me spend time in government schools, in tribal ashram shalas in Maharashtra, to chat with adolescents, only to realize that I was not there to study them, I was there to learn from them. And I think this attitudinal shift as a PhD student took me close to the people I was working with. Throughout the journey of conceptualization to interpretation, what I learned from Malavika is that locating social and social epidemiology becomes possible when you ask these right questions. I remember in the first year itself, she had shared a very interesting article with me on causes of the causes. It is written by Professor Michael Marmot, and it argues why structural inequalities need to be intervened. Putting it in the context of my research did not come quickly. I struggled a lot. But slowly through the process of learning, Malavika showed me why, as a public health researcher, one cannot superficially acknowledge the health disparities but question the causes of these health disparities and causes of the causes. So developing these students' abilities to question, their ability to find out answers, definitely needs patience as a mentor. Especially, when we are doctoral students, I think we are more or less pretty selfish. We are more concerned about our data. We get frustrated quite easily, as they often say, PhD journey is longer than it appears. We are least interested in those countless revisions which our supervisor wants us to do. And we want our name as an author in that most amazing journal as soon as possible. Nobody else knows how that journey feels like. But in my case, I had a supervisor who was empathetic, who was humane and rational in her approach. I remember it was 2016, I was in the field and I had that evening call. I frustratingly called her, sharing how 3 schools I had visited on that day rejected me an entry when I shared that my study was on menstruation and I wanted to include adolescent boys in my study. I had no patience. I wanted an easy answer from Malavika. Maybe I was expecting she would say, it's okay, Mukta, even if you can get done with 4 or 5 schools. Those of you who know her well will know how she had the knack of gently pushing you in the right direction without really, seeming too overbearing. She was also a hardcore teacher who was able to rightly spot those little teaching learning moments for the student. My frustration that day was one such moment she was able to spot on. I know how frustrating it must be. Are you still standing near the school, Mukta? She asked. Yes, they did not even entertain me. I was almost angry and insulted. Take a deep breath. That was a mantra she would give to all her students. And this is the urban school, co-ed, private, one of those elite kinds, right? Yes, I said calming myself down. It would be nice to have this experience noted down in your field notes. Mukta, think about it. Does it raise any questions in your mind about the combination of urban, private, co-ed kind of elite school disallowing their students from participating in a study because that study is of menstruation? She asked, gently pushing me to revisit my thinking about the binaries of private versus government, urban versus rural, co-ed versus non-co-ed. She wanted me to reflect on the hypothesis that urban was doing better than rural, private were doing better than government, and co-ed had some advantages to non-co-ed. So when I look back at these conversations, I realize how valuable it is for a public health teacher to sow the seeds of these questions and ability to reflect in students' minds. How testing hypothesis is not just a statistical process. It happens through our field reflections. Public health deals with people's everyday experiences of health and illness, and these experiences are hardly any linear in their appearance, and they cannot be broken down into these binaries. How difficult it might appear, Malavika knew that a grounded public health researcher needs to dive deep into these complexities, has to face difficult situations, face those rejections in the field, and has to get away with the comforts of quick, easy, and linear answers. I also have immense respect for Malavika's vocal emphasis on ethical practice and research. When I was working with her as a research associate for 2 years, before I joined her as a PhD student, both of us worked together to draft the IIT Gandhinagar's guidelines and the form that maybe some of you fill, an institutional ethics committee. She would jokingly tell her colleagues, I'm the Ma and Mukta is the Masi of IIT Gandhinagar's institutional ethics committee, and both of us would burst into laughter. But I must say that her promise to ethical practice went beyond applying to institutional ethics committee, getting that clearance and getting a consent. She taught me how to reflect on ethical dilemmas at every step of research. This process involved deep, engaging discussions on my positionality, carrying myself in the field, and reflecting my daily experiences during the data collection phase. She was very particular about treating minors with dignity and respect in my study. She would sit in front of me in her office and say, all right, I'm a potential participant in your study. I'm an adolescent girl. Let's try out a mock. She wanted her students to know the true meaning of an informed voluntary consent. Mukta, if I say, no, I don't want to participate in your study, how will you react? If I ask you, I will participate, but what will I gain from it? What will be your answer? If I say, yes, but you can clearly see some hesitancy in my eyes, what will you do? This was the biggest lesson for a budding public health researcher like me on how not to look at the participants as mere data points. Even after fitting those statistical models and finalizing the themes from qualitative data, she insisted on post-data collection visits to the field to meet my participants, to meet their parents, to meet teachers, to share my findings with them and get their feedback. All of these learnings happened in a very democratic environment. Malavika always ensured a safe academic space for me to engage in healthy debates and discussions. I think she would have never, ever appreciated if I would have become her blind follower. Now, when I am a faculty myself, I realize how valuable it is to let your students debate with you, let them be the academic decision makers. Her suggestions, even towards the very final copy of my thesis, would have the first comment, Mukta, here are my suggestions. Please accept if you agree. She never felt insecure while giving her that space to me. She was honest in sharing with me if there was any point on which she did not have much to contribute. She would say, why don't you meet your doctoral studies committee members? Why don't you meet other professors in Humanities Social Science department? I remember meeting many of them, experts from ethnography, humanities, political science, sociology, for my study on public health. You may not agree with everybody's views, but listen to them and think about their feedback. Honestly, that was not easy for me as a doctoral student. She kept insisting that I need to overcome an urge of giving instant reactions, answers for any question being asked, and being defensive in an academic space. She used to say, I know it's hard, Mukta, but one needs to try. She was a researcher who was eternally curious. And she was equally enthusiastic about Gramvarta impact evaluation programs and all other programs that she was involved in. She was also equally eager to understand Dr. Sankar's work at TINI, Tata Trust. She used to refer to Dr. Menon's work when she used to talk about social determinants of malnutrition. She had immense respect for Mala ma'am's qualitative research. And I know, she herself was so eager to learn those nuances from you, ma'am. Malavika's enthusiasm was beyond the grants, the funding, the prestige which it brought to her as a researcher. She was someone who genuinely engaged in these topics, sought to absorb all those experiences in a way that would enrich her perspective and her understanding of the complex challenges that she was seeking to tackle with her work. I think that is one of the biggest gifts she has given to me and to all her students. The keen balance of empathetic human being and analytical researcher was something which made her what she was. And last but not the least, one of my favorite things I remember about Malavika are the long, sometimes off-the-topic chats we had after our formal meetings related to work. They were done. The topics would range from whether Deepika Padukone or Priyanka Chopra was better in Pinga song, and we would differ and we used to have hard debate on that. Enactment of Thalaivi's dialogues, which all us students watched with her, whether Adhya Tea was better versus 2 Degree was better. And again, we had different opinions on that. Up to a point where she would share some very strange plan of designing, again, a very strange air conditioner to beat the heat in Ahmedabad. I don't know what those discussions have given to me, but they helped me deepen our bond in a way which I will never be able to articulate, never be able to explain to anybody. In my case, that bond did not end at me alone. She knew nearly every personal milestone that I crossed during my time here. She knew my family. She knew the struggles, the triumphs which we were going through. And most importantly, she was invested and was aware of the impact all of these things have on the student and students' performance. I think I was really fortunate to have somebody who was so well aware of me as a person, to have her encourage me not only in my academics, but all other things that I loved, dance, music, and of course, new Bollywood songs. She was instrumental in bringing many more wonderful friends and colleagues in my life. All of us who are here, and some of us could not attend today's program, but we are like an extended family. And we want to learn, we want to we want to build that same level of care, respect, support, which she has provided to us. Now that she is not among us, we can only seek solace in the fact that she bound us together in a lifelong relationship so effortlessly. She never saw us only as academics or scholars, but she saw us as people who she genuinely loved and cared for. And that, I think, remains her defining quality for me. I found speaking about her really hard, and honestly, I don't feel that I have done justice to what I feel about her and her contribution in my life. She was a scholar, a researcher, a teacher, a mentor, and although she was my PhD supervisor, I will still say she was my very dear, dear friend. I feel that I have imbibed her qualities of asking those right questions, having that curiosity for public health, her ethical approach in teaching, research, practice. And my promise to her is to never let her down. Keep working towards the betterment of people's health. Keep striving to be a good teacher. And I want to live up to that expectation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mukta Gundi, for sharing those interesting details from your PhD journey. We'll now move on to the felicitation ceremony. First of all, I would invite Dr. A.V. Subramanyam and Mrs. Srilatha Subramanyam. They'll be felicitated by Anupam Sharma. I request Dr. A.V. Subramanyam and Mrs. Srilatha Subramanyam to come on the stage.
I thanked the organizers at the beginning, but I have seen how much of effort
you people have put in to make this happen in memory of our darling daughter Malavika. We are ever grateful to you all people. And she has left a void in our lives which can never be filled, by anyone. But that is the truth. We have to live with her, cherish her memories and move forward. And I wish you all the best to her students. I want you students to carry forward her legacy and imbibe her qualities of compassion, kindness, human approach, and celebrating life in all its vibrance, always sharing people and enjoying, giving happiness and cheer to all around. She would be her programs would be the highlight in all our family functions. And she used to make a child of 2 years to dance up to 85 years old women. She would bring vibrance and energy to all the people around. And I want you to spread that vibrancy in all your lives so that Malavika lives in every heart. Thank you.
Thank you, sir and ma'am, for gracing the occasion. As we draw to a close of this inaugural edition of the Malavika Memorial Series lecture, I'm reminded of Ralph Waldo Emerson, the famous American poet who once said, unquote, "Cultivate the habit of being grateful for every good thing that comes to you, and to give thanks continuously. And because all things have contributed to your advancement, You should include all things in your gratitude. On this note, I invite Professor Deepak Singhania to propose a vote of thanks as our way of extending our gratitude to the distinguished guests who have graced the occasion today. Professor Deepak Singhania.
I don't want to take so much time. I think this is the way it has gone through the entire event. I personally feel it was a great way to facilitate Professor Malavika's memory, and it's really nice to see all so many different people connected to her parents. Someone Malavika admired, Dr. Purnima Menon, her close collaborators like Dr. Mala and Dr. Rajan Sankar, her student now herself becoming a mentor, and all her other students. So thank you so much for everyone coming together to help us in our effort of creating this memory. And we hope to sustain, this memorial series in future as well. Thank you again for coming together. Thanks so much. Yeah.
May I now request Professor Nishant Choksi to say a final word. Professor Choksi.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, there was a Senate meeting that I had to go to, so I missed some portion of the event. But I'm, just on behalf of Humanities and Social Science, again, when I first came to this institute 4 years ago, Malavika was the one who, she just made me, and I think every new faculty, just feel really, at home here, like just such a wonderful person. I think that was said over and over again. And, she just made this a very, congenial and collegial place to work, right? And any problem, any situation we had, she was always willing to give her time. And so I think every one of us really was just, deeply affected, and in different ways by her untimely loss. And I'm just happy that we were able to come together and celebrate her for first and foremost for her academic contributions, her personal contributions we've celebrated and mourned in various ways, but having this come together, and for I think annually for the years to come, to have a lecture on public health by community health and other aspects of social epidemiology by the very established scholars like we had today here, like all of you. I think that's something Dr. and Mrs. Subramanyam mentioned this in the opening. That's something she would have really appreciated, and we all felt that way. So this is just the beginning, right? Every year, and hopefully, with her passing has left a huge gap for us. But I think she would have also liked for us to build back up this, IIT Gandhinagar to be a premier place for the study of public health, social epidemiology, and all the issues she cared about. So we're going to work to do that, but by not forgetting her, but by continuing her legacy, right? And I think that's one of the real goals that we have now. So this is the beginning. So thank you all very much. And yeah, thank you for coming. Thanks to Deepak, Manoj, Anupam, Nilesh, Ashwin, the entire discipline and students to come and make this a truly inaugural event, right? Of what we hope is going to be the lasting legacy. So thank you.
Thank you, Professor Choksi. As we conclude, I quote a few lines from a poem in memory summarizing the legacy and the unbounded love we have for Professor Malavika Subramanyam. It broke our hearts to lose you, but you did not go alone. A part of us went with you the day God took you home. If tears could build a stairway and heartaches make a lane, we would walk our way to heaven and bring you back again. In life, we loved you dearly. In death, we love you still. In our hearts, you hold a place no one could ever fill. With these lines, we thank you for your presence, and we request all of you to please come on the stage for a group photograph.